That is on tonight. Mayor Dinkins is pledging his help to find the gunman who ambushed and shot Curtis Sliwa. The Guardian Angels founder and leader is recovering from surgery at Bellevue Hospital tonight. And McGee Hickey is there now with a live report for us. McGee?
Chuck, Curtis Sliwa is still in critical condition at this hour after undergoing more than 6 hours of surgery to remove 5 bullets. He's expected to recover fully from his injuries in a shooting that took place this morning at exactly the same place where he'd been attacked by 3 men with baseball bats 2 months earlier.
To me, I don't know why I should do it to him, because he's a great man.
Tonight, Guardian Angels patrolled the Tompkins Square Park area as they wondered who was gunning for their founder early this morning. It happened just after 5 a.m. near this newsstand at 7th Street and Avenue A. Curtis Sliwa told police he had just gotten into this cab to head to his morning radio show when he was shot 5 times in the thigh and lower abdomen by someone he said was crouching in the front seat.
He jumped out the window to get away. He's got scrapes and bruises on the side of his leg.
Had this bullet gone, I would say approximately 1 inch higher, he might have been paralyzed for life.
They're out to get him. He was set up. This is not the first time he's been put upon. Several weeks ago, he was attacked by fellows wielding bats.
Later, police determined the cab had been stolen the day before. Police say Sliwa's 2 white assailants switched into a white town car a few blocks from the shooting.
I admire Curtis Sliwa, and I think that he takes his life into his own hands doing what he does.
So I just hope everything works out for him and that his work continues, because it's not an easy thing he does, and the city needs more people involved and people doing things.
And with me now is Lisa Sliwa, who just within the half hour spoke to her husband. What is he telling you he heard them say before the shooting took place, or as the shooting took place?
All we know is they said "son of a bitch" right when they were shooting him, and that was it. And then he was struggling with a guy in the front seat and jumped out the window of the passenger side, wrestling with the shooter to get away from him.
Did he get a good look at them?
That we don't know yet.
Does he have any theories? Do you have any theories who could do this?
It could be anybody. Could be any number of enemies that we've made over the years in crime fighting, but we're not going to give up.
But do you have any ideas? I mean, who do you think it might be?
I don't have any particular idea. Right now, I'm just still concerned about his condition and hoping that he recovers. The guys are out on the streets looking for all the information that they can possibly get to turn over to the police. I hope we get these guys this time, and I hope the shooting stops in the city. Okay,
and he's going to be in intensive care for the next 2 weeks, and then he's expected to be released from Bellevue. We do have a hotline number that's been set up by the police for any information. That number is 212-598-0071. Reporting live from Bellevue, McGee Hickey, News 4. Back to you, Chuck.
Late last month, Guardian Angels found that Curtis Sliwa suffered multiple gunshot wounds in a planned attempt on his life. Today's New York Post reports that the self-appointed crime fighter has identified the shooters as associates of John Gotti, Jr., son of the convicted mafia boss. He joins us now with his story. Also here is WNBC News reporter John Miller, who covers organized crime and who first showed Sliwa mugshots of the purported assailants, and we'll hear more about that later. I want to welcome both of you to this broadcast. Tell me what led to this story in the New York Post.
Well, as you remember, back on June 19th, I had been shot while getting into a cab heading up to a morning radio show that I host with my wife Lisa for WABC. And I've gone through this routine many, many times from my apartment right near Tompkins Square Park in the Lower East Side. Hit the candy store on 7th Street, Ray's, sometimes get an egg cream. If it's good, you have a good day. If it's lousy, you have a lousy day. And then flag a cab. It's exactly what I did, except this time a cab had passed me earlier, went down towards a club trying to hail a fare. Right. And then as I came out with the tabloids, I held it down. They popped a Huey, picked me up, and I assumed I was going to WABC upon instructions, but they ended up veering off, and then immediately a gunman popped up in the front seat on the passenger side, had few words to say, "Take this, you son of a B," with a mask and an Irish walking cap on, and then began a series of shots as I desperately tried to break out of the back of the cab, which had been jerry-rigged. Doors wouldn't open, windows wouldn't open, and after a series of shots striking me in the legs and the stomach, I was able to dive through a front window that he had left open on the passenger side while the car was racing fast down Avenue B, and apparently he put a final shot in my back just before I tumbled out and the cab held away.
Saved your life by doing that.
Well, luckiest guy in the world. It had to be somebody upstairs looking out for me.
Why do you think he didn't kill you? Was he a bad shot?
No. He was a professional, cool, calm, collected. He was aiming his
But
shots.
he had you right there in the back of the taxi.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen like in the movies.
I'm not talking about the movies. I'm talking about that close a shot with that kind of weapon and with you sitting there.
Well, maybe he should have gone to the rifle range and the pistol range for more target practice. But when you're in that particular situation and you have that immediate X-lax attack and your whole life passes before you and you're bouncing around trying to avoid getting a headshot, it's very difficult to play Monday morning quarterback. You do what you have to do. If he wasn't able to take you out, then you look for the only possible way out of there to save your life.
Okay, but then I want to come to this story. Let me pick this story up as far as I know it. You two came together at the Garden during the Democratic National Convention?
Right.
And you said what?
I said, how's it going with your case? You know, what do you hear? What do you know? And Curtis said, nothing's happening, and, you know, they don't know who did it. And I said, everybody has an idea of who did it.
Yeah. And meaning a whole bunch of different ideas. But
nobody. There was one specific idea.
Yeah.
I had heard from the day of the shooting, and then more strongly on since the shooting, that they were really looking at the associates of John Gotti and John Gotti's son.
This was the word on the street.
This was the word on the street, and this was something the police had looked into, that the FBI was looking into.
Okay, and so what happened then? You said to Curtis, let's get together, or let's have lunch, or let's...
I said, as you know, has anybody reported this as it's developed? And he said no, and I said, well, after the convention, we'll get together and I'll look into it.
So you did get together, and you did what?
First, I went through the names of who was being looked into, and then based on my knowledge of these people, I picked out two people that I had information on were being looked at very strongly, and I showed Curtis the photos over lunch. And one he kind of ruled out as being too young to be the driver, and the other said he had a very good feeling about as the gunman, but because the gunman wore a kerchief, a mask from here, and a hat from here, and he got a very narrow view of the face, and therefore told me I can't positively identify him.
But then the next morning you get up and you see this, the New York Post.
Next morning I see in the Post, he says, a shiver went down my spine. I look at the guy and I know he's the guy that shot me.
But there's not what he said to you.
No, or what the police say he said to them.
What goes here, Curtis?
Well, after John Miller shows me the two photos, suddenly the 9th Precinct, which hadn't really been following any concrete leads, brings me 6 photos that they say John Gotti Jr. Follow-ups, you know, people who are cohorts of his. And they're only responding because I've been informing them of what John Miller has told me and keeping them abreast. I haven't kept them in the dark about John Miller. They show me the photo this time. I have the sketch next to it. Remember, I had done a sketch based on my description the week earlier with the mask, with the Irish walking cap. I said, look, I got a strong feeling on this guy. I'm looking at his face. This is the shooter, but I got to see him in the Irish walking cap and in a mask to be for sure. And they said, well, you know, that's not necessarily the ID you got to give. You got to give an ID of a guy without a mask and a walking cap. They leave, and the very next day when John Miller does his actual TV program on it, he puts the facsimile of the Stephen Kaplan, the guy I had pointed to as being the possible shooter, and then I put in, as I freeze frame it, the Irish walking cap from the sketch and also the mask, and I go, bingo, that's the guy who shot me.
You go, bingo, you said it sent shivers down my spine?
No.
That was earlier with John?
That was a quote that I've said consistently about seeing this guy in my dreams each and every night, and every time I'm fixated on the face and the first shots, it sends a shiver down my spine from the tip of my toes to the tip of my nose.
Roll tape. Take a look at this. Is a piece that John Miller did for WNBC television here in New York.
New York City police are looking into a group of young men connected to John Gotti Jr. Curtis Sliwa has been shown photos of about 15 members of young Gotti's crew. If there is any validity to this theory, why would the son of a powerful mob boss take out a contract on the high-profile leader of the Guardian Angels? In appearances on talk shows like Jackie Mason's show and on 9 Broadcast Plaza, Sliwa again and again has disparaged John Gotti and did what intimates of John Gotti say irks him the most. He's called him a drug dealer.
They've obviously got some problem with the audio up there, need to up the channel, whatever the problem is. The essence of that piece was...
The essence of that piece was Chief of Detectives Joseph Borelli saying, we are looking into the possibility that the Gotti people were connected to this. We are doing that because of Sliwa's public statements about Gotti, and we've shown him photos, but he can't identify anyone because of the mask.
Does the police believe that there is some truth to this story, that somehow Gotti's people might have been somebody associated with the Gotti family, may have something to do with this, may know about this, may have been involved?
Well, they certainly believe it enough to have done an investigation, collected the pictures, shown them to Curtis, and checked with all of their informants, and then borrowed the FBI's informants at least long enough to have the Bureau put the same question out. So, I mean, they've gone down the road on this lead. Are they locked into it? No. Frankly, they're looking for other avenues to pursue, but while this is the only significant one left, they're playing it out.
And what do the Gotti people say?
The Gotti people say that they had nothing to do with it.
They say it louder than that, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
That's not exactly the language they would use.
Actually, I spoke to one of the people today out by one of the clubs.
And they said, oh, John, it was not something we would do.
He said, this guy, speaking of Curtis, badmouths 900,000 people. Suddenly we're the bad guys. Why are we the bad guys?
Any quarrel you had with this story, Curtis?
Oh, the quarrel is some
Did
of
they
the...
overplay it in your judgment?
Well, hey, it's a front-page headline.
Yeah.
And they indicate that there were two individuals that I fingered when, as John Miller knows and the police know, I clearly ruled out the one person. They have a photo of an individual and the wrong name under it. But hey, you live in New York City. It's tabloid war. You don't always get it right. I have a radio show. I'm not always right. I'm not going to point fingers. But in terms of my belief, were the Gotti Jr. people involved? Yes, emotionally.
Why? What was the motive?
Well, remember, for months on end, while the Gotti trial was unfurling, John Gotti Sr. was being made into this heroic George Washington-type figure. Bruce Cutler would have this guy become mayor of New York City. And
being made into it by whom?
By the public. The public was buying into it. 60, 70% felt he was being shafted, that he was really a John Gotti the Good. Yet I know better, because I'm out there in the streets and I'm battling against the drug dealers on the corners, but I'm not going to be blinded to the fact that if you're the leader of organized crime, you're bringing in pounds, you're bringing in kilos, you're overseeing organized crime. You're becoming a role model for the Nino Browns, who are stars in, Crack City, USA, for the Tony Montañas in Scarface. Everybody in the criminal world wants to be like John Gotti, his own brother, doing 50 years for distribution and sale of heroin. And don't tell me he's not involved in drugs. You can't be involved in organized crime without having your feet and your arms deep in the drug trade.
Connect that to a motive to kill you.
Well, an emotional reaction on the part of the son, whose furniture is upstairs but rearranged in the wrong rooms, who's known to be a real firecracker when it comes to emotional responses.
But why you? I mean, what was it you were doing that was a threat to them or would cause them to go...
Well, nothing to affect their business directly. I'm just a flea on a dog, because the kind of drug dealers I'm dealing with are predominantly in the black and Hispanic inner city neighborhoods. But the fact that I would continue to speak on the radio, on television, that First Amendment right of free speech sometimes can do a lot of damage. And people in the past have paid for their right of free speech. Remember, I was attacked twice within 3 months under the same types of circumstances in what appears to be a very organized way of trying to either silence me, hurt me, and in the last case, put me 6 feet under in a pine box.
Yeah. What do you think the motive would be?
I, through my own experience, know that the one thing that drives the Gotti people crazy, despite the fact that Gene Gotti, John's brother, is doing 50 years in a heroin case, is when you call Gotti a drug dealer. When I've talked about his connections to narcotics, he's been very sensitive about it, and he sent feelers back saying that he was displeased. When a book was written that connected him heavily to narcotics trafficking, his people badmouthed that book, Gumbada, very strongly. That is the nerve that he doesn't like touched, because his take on all of this is that he's behind victimless crimes and that he cleans up neighborhoods of street criminals and pushers. And he was putting that out every day during the trial, and Curtis was saying the opposite at the same time.
Well, I think it's important, Charlie, to say we had Mario Cuomo, governor of the state in 1986, say there's no such thing as the mafia, la cosa nostra, the black hand. I'm part Italian-American. It's important for each person in an ethnic or racial group to point out the negatives in their group. Not like the Dominicans in Washington Heights who say, oh, we don't have drug dealers here, or the Italians who say there's no mafia. Purge ourselves of our negative elements, acknowledge who they are, and join together to clean the city of crime. You can't just do it with the guys on the corners. You got to go into the ivory towers. You got to go into the suits and into the suites and deal with the people who are bringing it in. And that's what organized crime does, bring it in. Who else is bringing it in?
We'll come back to that. We'll be right back. Stay with us. We're back. Curtis Sliwa is here, and John Miller. John Miller's been on this broadcast a number of times and has helped us understand Gotti and organized crime and has won a lot of awards and a lot of attention because of what he's done on WNBC television in New York as well as NBC News with Tom Brokaw. You're not happy about this, and you're being a little bit gentle with Curtis. And my impression is that you have stronger feelings than you're telling us.
My problem is that when we all went to bed last night, we had the Gotti people with a motive to hurt Curtis, Curtis's outspokenness. We had some people in that group who basically fit the description and had a known propensity through their criminal records of assault and assault and assault for this type of violence. The first attack on Curtis was done with baseball bats. That's their style. The second attack was done with an attack car, a hitman with a gun, an incompetent hitman, albeit, and a second getaway car, a Lincoln Town car that headed to Brooklyn. This all has the organized crime taste to it, by my experience. And we put that story out with the police confirming that they were following those leads and investigating that angle. Curtis couldn't identify the photos I showed him. Right. He couldn't identify the photos the police showed him. Yet next day, as it explodes into the newspaper headlines out of this TV story, Curtis is giving the impression in these quotes, or these quotes give the impression that Curtis said clearly that he made a positive identification and that the police won't go arrest these guys. What I'm saying is he took a legitimate story and then adopting his own spin control for the Guardian Angels propaganda, and the Guardian Angels are a good thing. He sent it out of the ballpark. I am tied deeply to reality in my role as a reporter. I hate to go so far from it. And Curtis has kind of dragged the story out of the realm.
All right, is this Curtis doing this because he wants to be on the front page of the New York Post? Or
ask him.
Well, I'm asking you what you think first.
I have the feeling that Curtis liked the sound of the story and believed it.
And so he exaggerated himself, or the reporter misunderstood, or...
Well, one reporter can misunderstand in the Post, but I mean the same quotes are generally in the Times and the News.
Explain yourself.
Well, it's very simple. He shows me a photograph. I say, this is a familiar face. This looks like the shooter. I need to see this guy with obviously the handkerchief on and the Irish walking cap. I say the same thing to the police more than 8 hours later. They're more upset at the fact that John Miller has had the pictures before they've been able to show me the pictures. So at that point, they're a bit wasted. I then go about artificially placing the Irish walking cap the next day and the handkerchief on the face of the individual who I see on TV. It all clicks. That guy is the shooter as far as I'm concerned.
So you're saying you reacted differently, more emphatically, because there were different circumstances, John, you buy that?
As you sit here now, are you saying that having told me you really can't identify the guy because the guy had a big mask on, and told the police the same thing, as you sit here tonight, are you saying that guy in that picture is definitely the gunman?
My gut reaction is that the picture you showed me that you identified as Steve Kaplan, who I never saw before, is the man in the mask and the cap who shot me. Now, I've been told by 9th Precinct detectives that they cannot go on that because there's a mask. So ultimately, no matter who I identify, if I looked at a million pictures, it would come to the same conclusion. How do you know what was below the mask? But there are certain instinctual gut reactions you get when you've been on the streets for many, many years, and you got to go for it. I'm sorry if I've offended any of the reporters out there by reacting in a guttural fashion, out of the gut. But that's the way I've been able to survive for 13 years. How do you think I was able to survive these 2 attacks? By intellectualizing? No, by basing it on my instinct, my intuitive nature, and a gut reaction. If I've offended anybody, if I've interfered with the process that the detectives must go through, I apologize. But you know something? I'm fighting for my life here. If it hadn't been for this guy, it would have never spun in that direction. Because every time I'd mention Cougines, hitters from South Ozone Park and Howard Beach, the cops would put a spin and say, no way, we're not even going in that direction.
Well, you're saying that they did entertain those ideas, are you not?
I'm saying when I would ask around on both levels of the investigation, who do you like here, and are you looking at this Gotti thing? They're like, we've been through everybody we like, and we're still looking at the Gotti thing. So to me, it was the last live
they circle
lead.
around and come back there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're saying that, that the precinct, you didn't think they were doing their job? I mean, you and other Guardian Angels, including your wife, have not had positive things to say about them, have you?
Let's remember, and John, you remember, the second day, I'm in intensive care on my back. I got 6 bullet holes in me. I've got every person sending every religious item plus, garlic around my...
The last rites.
Right. It's Santeria Priestess, Haitian voodoo. Everybody's trying to help me. And what
they think you're on your way.
What gets published in this newspaper on a different day, Curtis Sliwa was shot as a result of love triangle.
Right.
Police sources say. My buddies, the NYPD out of One Police Plaza, made it appear that I was having an estrangement with my wife, Lisa, which was not true, and that some third person was involved in a triangle.
And they suggested the reason that you were shot the way you were was because it was somebody who was doing it out of that motivation rather than an attempt to kill you.
And having been around the block for many years, you know when you throw mud out, if it sticks, people start coming out of the woodwork, particularly with that high profile. You know how much time they lost in the investigation because of that garbage?
No.
It didn't come from John Miller. It didn't come from a gossip columnist, Cindy Adams. It didn't come from a street person. It came from the NYPD, and I will never, ever forgive them for that indiscretion because it slowed down the progress of that case, and it was pure garbage, total garbage.
John, help me out here.
The problem I have is not with the love triangle thing or what police sources said.
Were there police people who believe that, police officials or officers that believe that there may be some merit to that story?
They had some trouble in their minds with the story, because I was checking into the Curtis shooting
with the story
from the
as
beginning.
a planned hit rather than a...
Well, I mean, their problem is that they don't have witnesses, and then the one witness that they do have has Curtis getting into the cab and talking with the two individuals, which isn't exactly consistent with his story, because they see two people in the front of the cab. Curtis's version of the shooting has the gunman pop up from under the front seat and start shooting, and they have the shots going off in a different place. Now, witnessing a shooting at 5 o'clock in the morning is an art unto itself. You got to expect there's going to be inconsistencies, but based on their experience with Curtis, which is attacks and, you know, publicity attached to them and an agenda and a political guy and a witness who's got an inconsistent version of the shooting with Curtis, and then the questions that they have to struggle with. How does a guy get past a hefty gunman over the seat of a taxi and out the front window? I simply answer that by saying, oh, when you're being shot at point blank, there's a lot of motivation to make things move.
Get the heck out of there.
Yeah. But, I mean, they grapple with how can he fit and how could he move the guy and how could he have gotten out the front window. And so, I mean, they're grappling with the story. So, of course, they're looking for another angle. They're looking for an angle they're comfortable with, one that makes sense because this one doesn't. Well, often reality doesn't make sense. So they were searching for a way around that.
But, John...
It's just this kind of conduct, though. After he says he can't identify a gunman, to say, I positively identified and the cops won't lock them up. When this appears in newspaper stories, whether Curtis said it or not, you have to put yourself in the police mindset, which is, there he goes again.
All right, but go ahead.
I'm to depend on the NYPD that for 13 years has treated me like a hemorrhoid in a red beret, was trying to find Preparation H to wipe us out. There's still bad blood in some sectors of the department, and they were not hassling the Gotti people. They were not going in with the organized crime guys and tossing and turning them as if a police officer had been killed. Now, I'm not saying I'm on the equal level, but when you have a citizen crime fighter who heads an international organization who's whacked on twice within 3 months, man, something's got to start shaking and baking. My life is at stake, and nobody at NYPD or One Police Plaza seems to be able to put this together. If they can't put it together, who's going to put it? You had more information than they did. How can that be? A reporter has more information on who it is that may have done the hit than the NYPD.
But you reacted more aggressively to their information than you did to his information.
Absolutely, because he was the one who first showed it to me, and then when I could look at it with the circumstance of the hat and naturally the scarf, it all fit together.
Okay, now you've heard his explanation as to what happened. Do you buy it? Does it make sense to you? Is it
okay,
real and
I'm
rational?
very comfortable in my position on this whole thing, which is I stick with my story, that was the angle police were investigating, and I know those people in that crew. This is their style. Okay, so we know it's being investigated and we know it fits their history. This is where I stop. I also know that Curtis didn't make an ID with me, although he said he had a strong feeling about one of the guys, and that he didn't with the police. I think when it leaves this point, it's out of my control. The ball has left my glove here. And then I think all of the politics and the assorted rivalries between Curtis's people and the police take on a life of their own, and the story gets away.
Let's not forget, if a third time happens and I get killed, it's a 3-day story, and then this is around a dead fish, and I'm a forgotten person.
Curtis, if you get killed, the story runs at least a week and a half.
Yeah, but the point is, I'm dead.
No, you're not a 3-day story. It's
6 feet under in a pine box, and quite frankly, when your life is on the line, and now you hear footsteps, and suddenly you're no longer the invincible person, the untouchable that you were for 13 years, it puts a whole different slant on things. And when people are laughing and cackling about what they may have done to you, you've got to defend yourself. You don't pin it on an innocent man, but when all roads lead to a certain group of people...
Let me wrap this up. What are you going to do now, Curtis?
Well, obviously, I have to travel very safely, watch my back, be followed by an entourage constantly.
What's interesting is he'll still say those things about the Gotti crew with it in his mind that they did this because he was saying that.
Well, there's no...
It's suggesting what, though? Suggesting he's fearless or suggesting what else?
Suggesting that he's fearless or foolish, depending on how you look at it.
There's no Kool-Aid that pumps through my veins. I stick to what I've said about John Gotti Sr., John Gotti Jr. If Kaplan is not...
As people involved in drugs.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, anybody would know that. That's organized crime. How else does drugs come into this country? You think those black and Hispanics on the street corners of Harlem and Washington Heights bring pounds and kilos in?
Yeah. Do you think this kind of story makes any difference? What does it do for you?
What the story does for me is it sort of puts me in the field of reality that if this organization is to continue to grow internationally as we have, I'm going to have to start looking after myself, my wife, my family, the extended Guardian Angel family, so that we can take this into the next decade and perpetuate it and turn it into a mainstream organization.
Have you gotten had any other threats that people said, look, we're going to finish off what we did, or anything like that?
Oh, well, you know, it's a walking, talking magnet for threats. You're like a Velcro man. But the threats in this direction are far more serious because for the first time, a professional aura over the hit, over the attack took place, and everybody had a gut reaction that it was organized crime. Now, that doesn't mean that it was, but when you have that emotional, guttural reaction, you got to go with your instinct.
Are you convinced the 3 attacks are connected?
Absolutely. Well, there are 2 attacks.
I mean, 2 attacks, yeah.
Absolutely. No question about it in my mind.
Yeah, that who did the first did the second.
Oh, it's like a soup and a sandwich, a horse and a carriage, like 2 peas in a pod. And anybody who disagrees hasn't been around a block a few times.
But you could also suggest that you got a lot of enemies. A lot of people would like to see you hurt.
A Rolodex full from A to Z, and they come in all racial groups, all descriptions, all backgrounds. But the only thing different in my past 13 years has been the 6 months on the case of John Gotti Sr. destroying this myth of John Gotti the good when he's been John Gotti the evil one.
You're going to come down and start his car, right?
Hey, Charlie, well, you're welcome.
Sport, come on.
John Miller, Curtis Sliwa, thank you very much. Are you doing the radio show? Are you back on the radio?
Oh, back on the radio with my wife, Lisa, and giving her agita. I think she needs to go to the hospital now.
Thank you both.
An alleged mobster with a notorious name may soon be walking out of a federal prison, leaving a sometimes notorious radio talk show host calling himself a, quote, dead man walking. After more than a week of deliberations, the jury in John Gotti Jr.'s trial deadlocked. Split verdict, not guilty of securities fraud, but hung on other charges like the one that Gotti ordered his underlings to rough up New York radio talk show host Curtis Sliwa. Alleged retaliation for Sliwa's on-air attacks on Gotti's mob boss father. Sliwa was shot by a masked gunman in a New York City taxi cab in 1992. So, conspiracy to kidnap Sliwa, the jury breakdown, 10 guilty, 2 not guilty. Actually kidnapping Sliwa, 7 guilty, 5 not guilty. Now, the judge indicating Gotti will likely be released, even though he very well may be tried again on the charges where the jury could not reach a verdict. Joining me now is Curtis Sliwa, saying he's fearful for his life, but looking forward to what he calls round 2, and John Gotti Jr.'s attorney, Jeffrey Lichtman. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. All right, Curtis, you really think he's going to come after you?
Oh, there's no question, and it doesn't necessarily mean the fingerprints of John Gotti Jr. free to be at home with his wife and kids will be on this, but there are sycophants, toadies, and lackeys who honor the memory of his father and John Gotti Jr. They want to walk in his shadow, and they'd be more than happy to brain me and bring me to room temperature. And I guarantee you, if anyone ever whispered into the ear of John Gotti Jr. that Curtis Sliwa was DOA, dead on arrival, it would make his day.
Curtis, you thought about, as a result of that, maybe going a little less conspicuous, or are you going to just keep it up and say, I'm not going to stop doing things the way I do them?
Every day on my WABC radio program, I'm going to continue to hammer away at this revisionism of the Gotti legacy, the reign of terror they brought to this city and other cities. You know, we're trying to somehow whitewash it and sanitize it, particularly with the defense attorney, Jeffrey Lichtman's argument that he withdrew from organized crime in 1999 and that you shouldn't hold him responsible for crimes committed in the past. There's only one way to withdraw from La Cosa Nostra, and that's feet first in a pine box 6 feet under.
All right. Jeffrey Lichtman, you've described this case as limping, as weak. But the bottom line is, it was this close to a conviction on some of the most serious charges.
Well, actually, Dan, he was acquitted of one of the most serious charges, and there was a deadlock on the weakest charges.
Well, wait. It was 11-1 for conviction on extortion and loan sharking,
which was the weakest charge in the case.
But 10-2 for conspiracy. I mean, this is not a sort of even divide. This is basically one or two people holding out, and then 7-5 on the kidnapping charge.
Right.
So, you know,
and
look,
had he been convicted of the charges where it was 11-1 for conviction, he probably would have gotten a sentence of about 6 years. With regard to Curtis's this fantasy belief that he thinks that Gotti wants him dead, I hate to say it to Curtis, but anybody who saw Curtis on the stand, the jury, the government prosecutors, the judge, the defense lawyers, he's worth a lot more to us alive than dead.
And you mean by that you're suggesting he was
a horrible witness. He's a nice man, I'm sure, when he's not on TV or under oath, but otherwise he was a horrible witness. He hurt their case tremendously. He's not even an important witness on the case because all he was a victim, and he couldn't identify who shot him. Nevertheless, he was caught in one whopper lie after another, and you wonder why it was 7-5. Nobody believed him.
Curtis, you want to respond to that?
10-2. Nobody believed me. I still had the majority. And let's talk about the 11-1. The 11-1, the holdout juror. The history of the Gottis and Gambinos are in the past, and you know this, Jeffrey.
What about the 12 people that acquitted him on a $25 million fraud?
They have fixed juries through bribery. John Gotti Sr., 1987, beat the rap on murder and extortion through bribery of a juror. Gene Gotti, the brother, beat the rap on a drug charge, bribing a juror. The jurors went to jail, as did the bribers, and you can't deny that, Lichtman.
And Jeffrey, and I have heard people who know nothing about the case say, oh, look at that, 11-1, 10-2. You know,
about 12-0
something
for
happened
acquittal?
to the juries.
What about 12-0 for acquittal on the securities fraud? What about 7-5? Look, the government is not alleging that there was anything wrong with this jury. They wouldn't dare. They know there's nothing wrong. Curtis, you were a good loser after my cross-examination of you. I would suggest be a good loser again.
Let me read from the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Michael J. Garcia, who says, the office respects the jury's findings. As to the charges on which the jury did not reach a verdict, we are evaluating further proceedings. We commend our prosecution team as well as our law enforcement partners for their devotion to the prosecution of this case. Jeffrey, I'd expect that they're going to retry him.
Well, we're going to move to for an acquittal on count one, which will include the Sliwa charge. And if we're successful, and I expect that we will be, because they couldn't find a proven racketeering act, not a single act stuck against John Gotti Jr. All that will be left will be the loan sharking and the construction extortion. It ain't much. It's not going to be much of a trial. I don't expect John will ever go back for a trial. But if there is another trial, they know where I live. They know where my office is. I'll be ready. I was ready before. I'll be ready again.
Will you tell your client to make sure that no one goes after Curtis Sliwa?
He's out of the mafia. The government knows it. They didn't allege a single criminal conversation from 2003 on. They were bugging him in prison. Every one of his conversations with his friends were bugged. They didn't offer a single tape to the jury. Why? Because he's done. What was heard on tape was his claim that he was out.
I was saying to even, let's even assume that for a moment. I was saying Curtis is saying, look, people he knows, people he likes may say, hey, John, you know, I'll hook you up here.
They don't say that,
It wouldn't be good for John. I mean, what were you saying, Jeffrey?
It wouldn't be good because we need Curtis alive. I hope Curtis lives. I have a trial, a federal trial in January, a narcotics case. I hope Curtis testifies in that case.
Curtis gets the last word on this.
Could you tell us where you go to resign from La Cosa Nostra? Where you sign on the dotted line?
He told his father in 1999
He told his father. He walked in the
tape.
shadow of his father, a murdering enemy of society that he honored and worshipped, and he followed in his footsteps. He didn't
People are allowed to change. They're allowed to change, Curtis. God knows you've changed any number of times.
Jeffrey Lichtman, we are going to bring the reign of terror of the Gottis and Gambinos to an end once and for all. And you know the U.S. government will not spare any resource to do it.
They didn't spare it so far. I'm ready for him.
Curtis Sliwa and Jeffrey Lichtman, thanks a lot.
Thank you.